All right, everybody. So today I'm going to be covering the Pultec EQ P1. This is a super classic EQ, which is one reason I kind of wanted to do a little more of a deep dive into it. It's very simple, so it doesn't, take very long to explain how to use it. However, it has a couple cool tricks up its sleeve. One of them being the low end trick, so it's really good for low end. It's also pretty good at giving some air, I guess, kind of like vintage air. There's more EQs out there now that do cleaner air. But one of the things about using a lot of these kind of famous pieces of equipment is so many songs that are, have been created throughout history have used kind of the same gear. So in a way, if you use these things, sometimes it'll give your tracks that kind of more classic sound. But like anything else, feel free to use it any way you want to. So this machine's pretty old. It was made in 1953 with these two guys, Eugene Schenk and Oliver Summerlin. They made a company called Pulse Technologies in New Jersey. Basically, they were like two engineers and they worked in the radio and telecommunications industry. So they basically made this EQ. Now, a lot of times with EQs, you're going to be boosting and cutting different frequencies. So a lot of times in the old days, the EQ process would kind of mess up your line signal. So what they kind of came up with was the passive EQ. And basically what this kind of does is it kind of gives you room to boost and cut frequencies while keeping the line signal kind of the same. Now, in reality, the signal actually kind of gets boosted by around 1.5 dB going through this machine, even if you're not doing anything with it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later and kind of like the uses of this machine. But basically, it does boost your signal a little bit, even if you're not doing anything at all. So if you're putting your signal through this machine, it will get colored, it will change the tone, even if you don't do anything at all. And that's one reason people like it. Sometimes people will put even their whole track through it and not do anything, and it still changes the sound. So it's pretty pure like that. So since it's an EQ, a passive EQ, basically the way that it makes up the gain that it kind of loses, the transformers that it uses, this is an old school device, it's a vintage device, the way it makes up for that lost gain is what colors that sound. So it actually does have an amplification stage in there that's coloring your sound. That's why even if you don't move the knobs at all, it still changes your sound. So this EQ was very successful. Obviously, it was like in Abbey Road and Motown, Capitol Records. Basically, everyone was using it for a long time. The company went out of business in 1981, but then in 2000, this guy, Steve Jackson, revived it, bringing in one of like the original guys, Schenk, from the original company, and they brought it back to market. And on top of Pultec itself, there's a whole bunch of other companies that do kind of similar, passive EQ things. You have the Tube Techs, you have the Manly Massive Passives, you have all the plugins, you have hardware recreations. Basically, when it comes to EQ, this is one of the big ones. It's definitely a good one to have and a good one to know. So getting into it here, this is the faceplate of the Pultec. As you can see, it's extremely simple. It only has a few knobs here. I personally kind of like EQs like this, where it kind of has like these stepped programs. It's kind of like API too, where it doesn't really let you, pick anything you want. It's kind of like faster. You just kind of find the frequency, dial it in, and move on. It also puts you in line with everyone else who's used this EQ. So like they're all making the cuts and boosts at the same frequencies. The designers of the machine thought that these are the best frequencies. So in that case, it's really good for, it's very musical in that sense. Obviously, there's a lot of EQs out there where you can, boost and cut at a million different frequencies. You pick whatever you want. You can get really into EQ if you want to. That's probably better for like sound design or if you're doing something really kind of specific. But if you want to step into the path of music and kind of like let go of that control a little bit, you can have faith in these frequencies. If you use it right, it will sound good. It's been proven for, what is that, 50, 20, it's like almost 70 years now. So, you can have faith in these frequencies. So here on the left is the low end. This is probably the most famous part of this EQ. It kind of has like a funny little trick there. So you can see this left side is the low end section. It has a frequency selector. So you can see there you can pick, there's like 4 different frequencies to choose from. And the boost and the attenuation. So in the manual, it actually says if you do one, don't do the other because they should cancel each other out. But what's funny about that is the boost actually has a little more gain than the cut, which is attenuation. So attenuation is cut. The boost, actually, that boost knob has a little bit more gain. And not only that, if you put your frequency thing at 60 and you hit boost and attenuation, they're actually affecting slightly different frequencies. So remember, this is an old school device from the 50s. It's not perfect. It's not like a computer. It's not digital. So it's not perfect. So when you do boost and attenuation, not only is their gain different, but the frequency is actually slightly different too. So if you do both of them, if you boost and cut, which the manual doesn't say, it says not to do that, but if you do it, it actually has this kind of resonant bump that you get. So when you cut and boost a frequency, it's kind of like a little boost right before the cutoff. And if you can kind of, you kind of move the knobs a little bit, you can get a resonant bump to hit right with your kick drum. So a lot of times that'll be 60. But every song is different. When you're using it, you basically want to try to find that resonant bump. So I'll be showing you right now. This is like a picture of kind of what a resonant bump looks like. But when you do a boost right into a cut like that, it has a perceived kind of present character. It gives it kind of like this punchiness. And one good thing about this EQ is it's really hard to make it harsh. I don't think you can. It's very difficult. So when you're moving the knobs, just feel free to give it a go. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry about blowing out your signal or anything. This is a pretty smooth device. Try to find where that punch is that you want. Where do you want the punch? And then dial in both these knobs to try to hone in that resonant bump exactly on the kick that you have. That way, it'll give you that punch. It's like this ethereal quality that it'll kick through the mix. It's like a knife kind of sticking out. So you'll get a really nice, warm, full hit on your low end. It's really good for bass guitars too. Obviously, kick drums. I guess you can put on like on toms. Yeah, even if someone has a really low voice, maybe. But basically, like kick drums, bass guitars, toms, anything that's low and boom, boom, bumpy, it'll be really good at kind of bringing that out. Now in this middle section here, you have a little bit more frequencies to pick from. It has a bandwidth control. And this is basically just a boost here. So this is kind of like on the other end of the frequency spectrum, not the low end. Here it can be anywhere from kind of like mid-range to kind of approaching high range, actually. This is just kind of like able to give you a lift. So some people call that like the smiley face. So basically in a mix, you kind of want a smiley face there. Remember, human hearing, we're more sensitive to the mid-range. So we're very sensitive to like 1000, 1.5, 2000, around that hertz. We're very sensitive. So in the frequency spectrum, kind of like a smiley face dip where the highs are higher and the lows are higher in terms of energy. A lot of times it sounds more balanced to us, this smiley face kind of pattern. So this is a way with the EQ that you can kind of lift the top end, right? So you're kind of lifting up the bottom end, you're lifting up the top end, and that kind of brings presence to whatever you're passing through this. Some people put their whole mix through this. Your whole song, it can go through this. You can also put, a lot, like I said, people use it on bass drums, kick drums, stuff like that. So feel free to put it on different stuff, but even on the full mix, this kind of works out. You probably want to be a little more subtle with that, but basically it kind of gives you that smiley face character, so it rounds it out. The bandwidth control here with the Q, I'll just show you a little graphic of what that does. That basically says, okay, you're picking a frequency, how many frequencies around it in kind of like a bell shape, how many around it are affected too, right? So if you pick, say, the 10,000 hertz, the Q, whether it's narrow or broad, it's like, are you going to affect pretty much just 10,000, or do you want to affect everything else around that? And that's basically going to be kind of like how many frequencies you're bringing up around with it. So on either end of the frequency you pick, it's going to lift those. In practical use, a lot of times this section is more known for that 16 hertz. The 16K. It basically is kind of like an older school version of giving you air. It has its own air quality to it, like any air. We talked about that in a different video before, actually, what giving air is, like, especially boosting frequencies above where people can even hear. You're not going to be able to hear any boosts, say, over 20,000. That's the range of human hearing. But if you do lift the frequencies above what humans can hear, it gives your sound a texture that kind of feels like air. It opens it up. It doesn't feel like a stuffy, cramped signal. It doesn't feel muddy and low. It's like it brings some presence and a textural quality to how it feels in your ear. So in this area, yeah, obviously every song's different, every track is different, whatever you're putting this thing on is different, but that 16 hertz is pretty good. It's definitely on the higher end of this machine, and it's a great contrast, a great counterbalance to the boost you'll probably be doing on the low end with this. So with that 16 hertz, with that boost in the top and with the boost in the bottom, you're going to get that smiley face, and that's kind of one reason why this machine is famous. And finally, in the upper part there's an attenuation knob. That's just to kind of shave off any high frequencies if you don't like them. Honestly, I haven't really heard many people talk about this section very much. It obviously depends on your signal. If you have something very sibilant or very nasty, you can kind of tone down some of that harshness with this. But in general, this is a very old device, and everything it does is going to be pretty smooth. So it's good at smoothing out anything that's, I guess if you had something that was very digital, very cold, very sharp, very high sounding, and you wanted to try to smooth it out a bit, kind of make it, humanize it a bit, make it less like a broken computer, you can shave off some of the top frequencies with this. So finally here at the end, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to show you an example of something that's not going through this, and then we're going to put it through the machine so you can hear the bump that this thing does. It gives it saturation, it gives it character. That's the emulation. I'm going to be using the plugins here, but every plugin, whether you use like Waves or any of the hardware emulations, even Pultec does this super well. Obviously, they're really famous with their preamps and EQs. Basically, the sauce, the thing that everyone's going after, is this machine is raising the level back up to a usable level after you do your EQ work, right? It brings it back to normal. That's the passive EQ. And that stage, I guess, the EQ amplification stage, adds some really nice character. And on this second example, I'm going to just show you like a couple of things of just pushing this machine to the max so you can kind of hear really what it's doing. We're going to be exploring some of that low end. So I'll be showing you like an audio example with the low end and with the boost and the cut both applied, trying to find that resonant bump, the low end trick. And then we'll put it in and out so you can hear what it's like with the bump and without the bump. So that's pretty much it. So basically, I think almost anyone who produces or makes tracks should have some sort of kind of Pultec style EQ. They're very important. It's a great thing to practice with, to play with. I definitely think it's better to use this than to go straight into like hardcore digital EQs where you put the exact frequency and you can have like a million bands and like, don't start there. That's for a very specific use case. If you're doing music, you're just chilling, you want to do something and you want to try to, partake in kind of like the history of the musical EQs, this is a very huge classic. And it's definitely worth the time putting your kick drum, basses, toms, even your whole track. Try throwing it through this. All the different versions, they have different levels of quality, but in general, they do the same thing. They're all going to probably affect your signal, whether you turn the knobs or not. So be mindful of that. But basically, it's a nice saturated character that people enjoy, and it's a classic. And yeah, definitely try it out. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.